Hi, everybody. It is Laura plus Christy Real Estate, and welcome to our next installment of our Be Well Advised series. Today, we are fortunate enough to speak with Peter Borszcz, who is a longtime Kelowna lawyer. He practices in the area of business law, real estate development, commercial lending, and commercial real estate.
And today specifically, we wanted to talk to him about living on the water and buying and selling properties on Okanagan Lake. What is involved? We have a dock there, we've got the foreshore, we have high water mark, we've got environmental concerns, and we just want to make sure that we are all very well advised when it comes to buying and selling real estate on Okanagan Lake in Kelowna. Welcome, Peter.
Hello.
Hi, Peter.
Hi.
So like we said in the intro there, we wanted to chat with you today just with regards to the foreshore, the dock licensing, all things to do with living on the waterfront. And let's focus specifically on Okanagan Lake for today, simply because that's where we live. That seems to be the predominant lake that people in the Okanagan are focused on. So all of our kind of comments and questions and answers will kind of focus on Okanagan Lake.
Okay, sounds good.
So I guess, like, first and foremost, like, who gets a say on Okanagan Lake? Like, what is our governing body?
Okay. Well, the important thing that everybody needs to understand is that you don't own the water, and that goes up to the high water mark, right? So all of the body of water is owned by Her Majesty the Queen and Right of British Columbia, so the province, and it is essentially given out to people who ask for it on a very temporary basis. So that's important for waterfront owners to know, is that you don't own the water, you don't own up to your high water mark, and that's where your property line stops, is right there.
So when you say high water mark, that would be established with a survey?
Yeah, absolutely. And importantly, it can change over time. There's two legal concepts called accretion and subsidence, which basically means that as that high water mark either moves up the bank or down the bank, so too does your property line. And for some property owners, especially if you live on a river or something that moves a lot, sometimes you do actually want to get a new survey because you can gain a few feet of property. Or conversely, if you think you're paying too much property tax and you want to do a little bit less, then you can get that edited as well with a new survey into the land title office due to that accretion or subsidence event, that high watermark changing, and a BC land surveyor would be who you'd ask to do that.
Okay, so that's kind of step one for establishing where that high water mark is.
Absolutely, and it's done over time, and there is some established high water marks, well-established high water marks on Okanagan Lake because it's so heavily used, and there's lots of people who live right on the lakes.
So I've lived in the Okanagan, Christy's lived in the Okanagan pretty much our whole lives. We used to, and we always have, just called it a dock license.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to us a little bit about, is that the proper term to use when you are speaking to the foreshore? I mean, there's legal structures, illegal structures, conforming, non-conforming, authorized, unauthorized. I mean, it's literally enough to make your head explode. So just kind of demystify this a little bit for us.
Okay, so it's a little bit about terminology, but what you first of all have to understand is that there's three general categories of how dock licenses are granted within British Columbia. Okay, so you have areas of general permission. That's not Okanagan Lake. Okay, so those are like our smaller mountain lakes where they say, you know what, if you have a cabin up in one of those smaller mountain lakes, you can just go ahead and build a small dock. You don't even have to ask. You just, as long as it's within this size guidelines, you can do that. Okay, Okanagan Lake is a specific application area, which means that if you want a dock on Okanagan Lake, you have to apply to the Ministry of Lands, Water and Forests, I think is the appropriate ministry, and they will grant you, if your dock is compliant and your plans are compliant, they will grant you the license to use that dock. Okay, so that's a specific permission application type of license, which is what most people on Okanagan Lake have. The other kind of third category of licensing is a lease, and they can give you a lease for a term of up to 20 years. That's generally used in the commercial dock context, okay? So if you're a strata corporation that has a dock in the Okanagan, we have a few of those. You know, like, for example, you know,
Dock be that?
sorry?
So would the El Dorado dock fall under that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, any dock where they would have, as the ministry calls it, substantial investment. And the El Dorado dock would be a perfect example because, of course, there's a gas bar out there and everything else. So, you know, they wouldn't have made that investment without having guaranteed tenure. The thing about the specific permission, like I said, which is what most Okanagan homeowners have, is it's not guaranteed tenure, and they're not going to give you anything more than that, right? Because the province's perspective is, we own the water, we'll give you a temporary right to use it, and yes, you can put a small dock structure out there, but if things change and we want that stuff removed, we can ask you to remove it. And that's where we get into some of these, you know, compliant and non-compliant type of languages. Most newer dock structures, because they were built after the change in the ministry guidelines, and this is about 5 or 6 years ago when they actually published some really clear guidelines on what they expected to have in a dock structure, are going to be compliant if they were built by a professional. And most people don't hand build their docks by themselves. Most people will pay for somebody to do that. It's a pretty tough job. So most of those are compliant. And so the ministry is just going to say, yes, it's a compliant dock, and let you live there. Now, some of the older structures, though, were built by general contractors who didn't know what they were doing. People were pouring concrete into the lake. People built massive boathouses or structures out there, which also the ministry doesn't like to see. And so oftentimes you'll have these old historical structures, and the ministry will say, okay, look, thank you for your application, but you can't have a boathouse on a lake. You can't have concrete in the lake. And, you know, we'll let you continue to use it for the time being, but we may give you what's called trespass notice, because remember, this is the government's land, and force you to remove that offending dock structure at some point in the future. So if you are a buyer, for instance, and you're looking at one of these properties and you're thinking, you know, look, there's a non-compliant structure here because, like I said, there's a large boathouse. There's the deck of the dock is super wide, or there's concrete in the lake or something like that. Then be wary, because you may have a very large removal bill coming up if the government says, you know what, this area now is, you know, red zone or black zone for salmon spawning. We need to rehabilitate this area. And then that's usually the trigger for a lot of those homeowners to get those notices to say, okay, now you got to get those non-compliant docks out.
So in talking, I guess, non-compliant and compliant, we also, is that still the same as basically legal, illegal, conforming, non-conforming, authorized, not authorized?
There's a lot of different language that goes out there, and sometimes we mix up the municipal language with the provincial language, because remember, there's a couple different layers of government authority here, right? So we've been talking about the provincial layer, which regulates the Okanagan Lake side and how you can have your dock out there. But we also have to remember, there's, especially in the city of Kelowna, there's this whole city of Kelowna layer, or there's a regional district layer if you're outside of the city of Kelowna, where the city of Kelowna does actually regulate those first 15 meters after the foreshore, because that is an environmentally sensitive area. So depending on how your dock structure goes out into the lake, you may be dealing with the city of Kelowna and be offside of a bylaw, and then you may also be offside of the province on the other side of the foreshore or the high water mark line. Okay, so there's both kind of levels of government that we may have to deal with when we're getting these things repaired or resolved, or we're simply doing our due diligence to see if it's all compliant.
Okay, that's very interesting. So, okay, we understand that. So if we were to list a property, say somebody came to us, they lived on the Okanagan Lake, say 10 plus years, they want to list with Laura plus Christie, and we need to gather some documentation to do this. What are we gathering, and why? And what do we need to provide to the buyer's realtor and to the process to kind of represent our client?
Well, the biggest thing, of course, is any correspondence that you've had with either the city of Kelowna, which may or may not be there, but more importantly, the province, right? So the province you should have some document with the province that authorizes your dock. And depending on the age of that document, that may be a water lot lease if it's really, really old. That may be an old dock license in the old form, or it could be in the new form of a specific permission application, which has been done with the government. And ideally, it's the newer rather than the older, because they're only granted for a short number of time, 3 to 5 years, and then they have to be renewed. The government's going to want new pictures, new kind of outlines of where those things are, because they like to keep tabs on who's using their property, because remember, it is ultimately theirs. So in doing the due diligence is, what has our correspondence been with the various governments here? Have that on file, whether you have scans of it or actual hard copies of it. Don't lose those documents. Those are going to be really important for your listing realtors.
So if a sale occurs and we need to transfer the dock license or specific permission to occupy from owner to new owner, does that sometimes trigger the environmental kind of process of it all, for all of a sudden they're like, hey, what's going on here? So could that open a can of worms?
Well, it's a can of worms we can't prevent from being opened, because what everybody has to understand is it's not something that's attached to your title, right? Because you don't own the land, therefore it's not attached to your title. You as the upland owner are the only person who can apply for that dock license, but on the transfer of the land, it doesn't automatically transfer over. You have to actually have a new application every time you go ahead and transfer the upland part of the property. So what that means is that every time that new application goes in, the government's going to relook at the photographs, relook at the survey, relook at everything there and say, is this still compliant with current policy, right? So, and have the salmon spawning grounds changed, whatever it is. So that's all part of whether they're going to continue to approve of the structure. And that's where we get into, as we talked about earlier, some of these non-compliant structures where they say, all right, you are non-compliant, but you can continue to use it until we give you a trespass notice, right? So they'll identify you as, not being on the right side of the law per se, but the government's not going to do anything about it until they issue that trespass notice to you.
Yeah, so not to be an alarmist, I would say it's not necessarily going to red flag you when you sell your property that you're going to have to do some immediate sort of remediation work to the foreshore or to all of that area. But it is probably something that you want to be very forthcoming with, so that it doesn't come back after the sale as you being privy to information from the, the ministry that you were supposed to do X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah, and that's a critical point. Like, a lot of these situations are going to be in the, like, well, let's just wait, let's just watch it type of box with the ministry. But there will be those situations, and it's going to be very property dependent. So this is where due diligence really comes into it, where the province is going to say, no, look, you are in black zone, and you put a dock in that wasn't supposed to be in, you need to remove that. And so it's going to be very factually dependent. So you're going to have to kind of look at where you are on the map, and what it means for your particular property. There's really no, I can't provide any general rule or general assurance that, okay, always in this cases it's fine and always in this cases it's not, because ultimately we're dealing with government decision makers here who are human beings and applying a set of policies, and that set of policies can be applied differentially between properties.
And in our experience, we have found that, it is not black and white. Christy and I can attest the fact, having sold Lakeshore in the past years, we would love to be able to provide you with that very clear-cut answer and to be able to point you in the right direction to get that clear-cut answer, but it sometimes just doesn't exist. And it's a little bit as the wind flows and who shows up to your property and the relationship with the ministry person that shows up. And so, yeah, I think that we understand that. I think that hungers back to why it's important to have people in your corner that know what, point you in the right direction, like yourself or realtors that are, skilled at selling this type of property in the Okanagan, so that they can kind of help you along in that process.
Yeah, when people buy waterfront property, it's all about that relationship to the lake, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes the first thing, noting that you don't actually own the lake, I think is a big mental hurdle for everybody to get over that. And then once you get over that, the rest of it kind of falls into place, because you realize, okay, I know that I don't own that now, so there's going to be additional steps for me to use it if I want to use it. So that's a pretty big thing. And selling waterfront is like selling any other kind of specialized piece of real estate, right? It's something that hopefully you have people on your team that have done it hundreds of times before, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I think we've gone through a lot today, but I think just to wrap it up, Peter, if we were to ask you, we're bringing a buyer to a property, in your opinion, what are their like top 3-4 questions that should be like, you need to be asking this, whether it be about the foreshore, the dock, or just the general waterfront area?
Okay, so top 3 things are: 1, do you have a current specific permission license, right? That's number 1. Because if they have been communicating regularly with the province and that's up to date, your likelihood of having problems is really, really low, right? If those people who had got the lease 20, 30 years ago, decided to pour some concrete in the lake to make a patio, expanded the dock themselves, that's going to create some issues. So if they have the current license, the government has the up-to-date pictures, right? The dock hasn't changed since those pictures. That's important. The second thing to consider is your future needs and uses of the waterfront itself, right? If the dock that's there that is approved meets your needs, then you're going to be in a good position. But if you're walking onto that property saying, okay, so I have to be able to park 3 boats here, and I want to have my guest house over the water like in Fiji and all of this kind of stuff, then you may want to stop, because those types of things just, they're not going to fly in the Okanagan, right? It's a matter of balancing, right? Yes, we want people to be able to use the lake, but we have to be good stewards of the lake. So know that, your future needs and uses have to mesh with the property that you're getting, okay? And then the third thing is more directly towards strata owners. We have lots of stratas on the lake now that have docks. And for those strata owners, one of the critical questions is, how does the strata actually hold their dock license? Okay, there's a few stratas in here where sometimes it's a private company, sometimes the strata itself owns it. And if you are given tenure in your dock license, they can only give you so much as they have, right? That's a really critical rule at law. You cannot give what you do not have. So if somebody's saying, I'm giving you a 10-year dock license, where's their 10-year plus a day dock license that says that they have the right to sublease that for you? Because in most cases, a dock license is not sublettable out to somebody else, right? It's granted only to that owner by the ministry. And if you want to sublet it out, you actually need to have ministry consent. That's a pretty common rule in all dock licenses. So make sure you know where those rights are coming from if you're one of those strata owners that want a dock license.
Okay, that was very helpful. Christy, do we have anything else really? That's I think we kind of covered it. It's definitely high level, but really does just kind of delve into some, demystifying some of the things that people may not understand about the waterfront.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we've kind of covered surface things, but no, it's great. And Peter, you're still one of our favorites for Legal Update. When we sit in your class, it's awesome. Yeah, we just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule today and chatting with us. We look forward to launching our next Be Well series with you.
No problem. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay, bye-bye.